welcome back to this week's Car-pinionated, where if you've watched for the last couple of weeks, I'm joined here by Jeff Danker and Glenn Packman, two friends of mine who I enjoy talking about cars with, and so we're going to have at it. So we have a slight history in our almost year that we've been doing this of telling brands what's wrong with them. I think the first thing we did was Stellantis's American arm, and their, I don't know, what is it? Outside of, you said it earlier. You said, Jeff, like outside of Jeep, they make 6 cars.
4, I think, is the answer. Yeah. And 3 of them are on the LX platform.
And we've talked about Tesla in various iterations. So today we're going to talk about Infiniti. And those of you of a certain age will remember the late 80s. And Infiniti started out at the same, little bit after Acura, but around the same time as Lexus, with bringing out premium Japanese cars, something that had not been talked about in this country before. They come to the market in a splash of advertising that didn't have a single car in it.
You have a natural unconscious rhythm when you drive, a flow of intentional and unintentional movement as you settle in behind the wheel and accelerate to cruising speed, as you tune the radio and grip the steering wheel. Now, a true luxury car can anticipate those movements, accommodate them, respond easily and predictably to them. That's the nature of Infiniti.
It was rocks and water and leaves and wind, and it just said, drive Infiniti. And has been, I think, more or less missing the right step ever since, I would argue. So Glenn, what, you owned an Infiniti, so two of them.
We had 2. Well, one was mine, one was my parents', but I drove it quite often way back then. This was in the in the birthing process of Infiniti. Yeah, I had a G20, which is a very innocuous little 4-door sedan, and then my dad had the J30, which had the sloped trunk, very polarizing among people. Some people thought it was beautiful, other people didn't. My big takeaway from back then was these were really well put together cars. They were extremely reliable. The G20 had some of the best steering I have ever had on a car, and it was a 4-door sedan. They borrowed the terrific little engine from the Nissan Sentra SER, which was a tiny little power plant that put out tons of horsepower for back then. And the overall package was really terrific. It was comfortable. It didn't look like that much. The big thing back then was that it was cab forward design, so that was the only thing that really set it apart from the rest of the market. And then the J30 was really luxe and powerful, but it had a polarizing design that didn't, that not everybody wanted in their garage. But these were very good cars. I mean, I drove them, and I can say that I really, really enjoyed having both of them. All that being said, I'm kind of with you in that I feel like Infiniti has never really honed in what they're trying to be. Their target market seems to be mushy, for lack of a better term. I've always felt like, okay, so are they really going after the people who want to buy Lexis, whatever Lexus makes in bulk, or is it something different? Sometimes their design language is attractive. A lot of times, not so much. I don't know. There seems to be a lack of vision behind the Infiniti brand in many ways. That's my take.
Jeff?
I had to, when we first mentioned that we were going to talk about Infiniti on this episode, I had to go back and look at the Infiniti website to remind myself what they actually sell in the US,
Right.
because I genuinely didn't remember.
Yeah.
And I think, to the point that both of you have made about kind of a muddled identity and a lack of distinction, I think you can add to that a sort of lack of investment.
Yeah.
The newest, in terms of platform age, the newest vehicle Infiniti sells is the QX50, which is the little two-row crossover. They sell a regular looking version and a four-door coupe version, which I think came out in 2017 or 2018. The G50, which is the sedan that's basically the US version of the Skyline, is on its 10th year now with a couple of refreshes. The QX80, which is the Nissan Armada / Patrol, has been out since 2010 in various forms. I mean, it is almost the Chrysler 300 of Infinitis. And and there's just kind of not a ton else going on there. And I did forget about the Nissan that's based on the Pathfinder, whatever that is, the QX60, I think it's called. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Also,
Yes.
I can guarantee you that this podcast will be the most anyone has talked about Infiniti in probably 3 years.
Very good point. It's a very good point.
and you're right, Glenn, they were fantastic cars. Like the G20 that you had, which was basically the Nissan Primera, which was kind of a mass market vehicle in Europe, leather lined and bronze glass for America, was a really solid little car. But it also, against the Acura Integra, which I think would have been the sort of contemporary Acura, which the Integra was way sportier and more interesting, and sold and about the same price as a Maxima, which was at the top of the range for Nissan in the US. It was a tough proposition for a lot of buyers.
Right.
And I think it sort of, and also it didn't look a thing like the rest of the line. Like the J30, that's maybe the peak of Infiniti design, was that car, and its design language showed up then also in the Nissan Altima of the period, in the sort of early to mid 90s period, when that was a really handsome car.
Sure.
But then it kind of lost the plot to the point where it's difficult to differentiate a Nissan from an Infiniti in a lot of ways. What happened to good car names, you guys?
Oh my God, we talk about this all the time.
We've discussed this.
I was so thrilled when Acura brought back the Integra. I'm like, oh, thank God, a car I recognize. I'm so tired of alphanumerics. Honestly.
Yeah, really. We're looking right at you, Cadillac. Hello.
Well, I mean, they're trying. I mean, it's the Celestiq and the Lyriq, and I mean, they're getting there. It's not quite the Sedan DeVille, but it'll do.
Yeah, I thank God for Lincoln, because I would never remember any Lincoln. It was an MK something. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And that's the other problem. That's the other problem that Infiniti has, is that other sort of luxury car makers this gets back to lack of investment, have introduced new and interesting things, and Infiniti hasn't.
Yeah.
A friend of mine has a Lincoln Corsair. I've been in it a few times. I know it's a Ford Escape under all of that leather and open pore wood and stuff. It's fantastic. It's a gorgeous car. It rides really well. It's very smooth. That's a much more interesting choice than Infiniti. And while Nissan was sitting around, hiding its ex-CEO in violin cases or cello cases or whatever, Hyundai Kia come and roll out the Genesis.
Oh
brand.
my
Yeah,
God.
right,
Yeah.
right,
And
right.
obliterated the market.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Hyundai Kia in general are just kind of killing it up one side and down the other in terms of design.
Mhm.
And you know, Genesis is what Infiniti probably should be,
Yeah,
but
very
it's
good point. Yep.
Yep,
And
exactly.
see, and that's just it. Who does Nissan want Infiniti to reach? Is it their sporty division? Is it their luxury vision? Is it luxury? And it makes me think back to all the lines that GM had that were just, you know, again, the language, the intent was all just mushy. I mean, a Pontiac was what exactly? You know, somebody would say, "Oh, Pontiac was their sporting line." Really? You know, and that I think that's exactly the you know, to the place that Infinity has gone over the years. It's a crying shame because I think when they first came out, there was that spark there. You know,
I let me go find my copy of, oh, it's right here. My copy of My Years with General Motors by Alfred P. Sloan. And let me see if I can look up the Pontiac value proposition vis-a-vis Oldsmobile and Buick.
right,
Yeah.
right,
No,
right.
and I agree with you, Glenn, when you start talking about like the 70s, the 80s, you know, then they just become this blur, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
Exemplified in the Lincoln Town Car ad.
The black Cadillac, please. Right away, sir. Excuse me. I believe that's my Buick.
Today, it's not easy to distinguish yourself from the crowd.
This my Cadillac? No, it's an Oldsmobile. I think. The Lincoln Town Car, please. Yes, sir.
But the Lincoln Town Car stands apart.
But if you go back even to the, you know, early 70s, the 60s, and earlier than that, that each of those brands had a specific clear market. But
sure.
going back to like it became cheaper to kind of make them all the same, right?
Right.
You know, and I think, and that goes back to Infinity because it becomes cheaper to make a little bit of a difference on the, you know, the would be the second gen Pathfinder and make it an Infinity that has a round clock instead of the digital clock that stopped working after 2 years. I can testify. And so, you know, they I don't think that they put enough money, and maybe that's a Nissan problem that they don't have enough money to put at these things. But you're letting it die on the vine, you know, and Ford could have been in the same boat with Lincoln, but I think they said, we're going to make something of this, you know. And to your point, Jeff, about the Corsair, I don't think the average car buyer knows that the Corsair is an escape.
No,
You know,
that's
that you know, I think that, you know, people, you know, kind of, you know, oh, the Aviator, it's just an Explorer. Oh, that's a hell of an Explorer.
yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
Glenn and I were there in New York when they unveiled it. Automotive journalist, like, there was this moment in the room where like they were just astounded at this car,
Right.
which is, you know, which I don't think feel like takes a lot of money to do, you know, to make it. The whole line is very cohesive. The design language is all there. They understand their brand. It is what it is. It may not be something for everyone, but Lincoln gets it. And you know, outside of having this vague pretension of being, you know, the Japanese BMW, I don't think Infiniti has ever had it.
Yeah, they got a little bit off on the wrong foot, as you correctly pointed out, Doug, with their sort of opening marketing campaign. And what happened after that, of course, was that the Japanese bubble economy crashed in the early 90s, and that sort of made it harder for Nissan Infiniti to invest money in unique stuff. Whereas Lexus right out of the gate was like, we're going to be the Kirkland signature Mercedes, by God. We're going to sell you an S-Class for the price of an E-Class. And darned if they didn't, and they're still doing it now.
Yeah.
Even now that their S classes is approaching S class money. Uh,
True.
and
True.
you know, Acura said we're going to do the hot rod, so we're going to bring out the Integra Type R. We're going to throw a 240 horsepower engine in basically an Accord, which trust us, kids, in the early 2000s, that was a lot of horsepower going through a front drive chassis. And just we're going to do that, and that worked cool. And Infiniti decided, well, maybe they didn't decide, and they just kind of have been languishing. So what's the solution?
Okay, so here's a wild idea. Okay, I think that they should take over the Z car. I think you push the Z car to Infiniti. Not meaning that literally, but push it over to those dealers. Maybe you name it something else. I don't know. You put some money into it, making it a little bit differentiated from what it currently is. Because I think that there was a lot of hope for the current gen, but I don't think people are really thrilled with it. And maybe that becomes what you build the brand around. I think the other thing would be finding places to partner with the brand. Maybe that's, if you want to get to the driving routes, maybe you say, every Infiniti Z car, you get, 2 days at Skip Barber, or something like that. So you build this kind of consciousness within that brand of this is what our meaning is. This is what we want to bring to the people. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I think the other thing you do is you just let it die. I mean, that's not. I don't want. I like to see everyone succeed, but I don't know. It is fixable.
I had a very similar thought, only it involved the GTR.
Okay.
Which I think at price point is a better match for the Infiniti demographic than is. I mean, also a car that hasn't been updated in a billion years. But
yeah.
The other option is that dealership lane becomes the way the Nissan, Mitsubishi, Renault cartel brings other product into the US.
Okay.
Like, I'll tell you what, if I were to drive by an Infiniti dealer and see an Alpine 110 on the front yard, I'd pull in a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And frankly, some of Renault's offerings right now are really attractive, and most of them are at least partial hybrids. Not that EV is the answer here, but it at least provides something modern, some acknowledgement that the last 20 years have happened.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the enthusiast market, knowing that car that I've always wanted, that they've always sold in Europe, it comes here, I'm on board. I'm on board. Let's ignore Fiat or Alfa Romeo as kind of beacons of how we're going to do this. But if you've got a decent dealer setup, which Infiniti probably has,
yeah,
maybe that's the way to go. That's the way to go. Glenn, do you have any thoughts of outside of bringing back the G20?
there you go. Hey, I'll tell a little bright side story on that. My dad got the G20 because he bought his J30 and loved it so much that when my mother needed a car, he decided, I want to put another Infiniti in the garage. And that was back when the brand was new and kind of exciting, and there was a little bit of language going on there. And he decided to get my mother something, now that they were empty nesters, something smaller, because she just didn't need that much car. So that was my mom's car, believe it or not. And I remember when she got it, I called her up and I said, how do you like the new car? And she said, well, there's something weird going on with the new car. And I asked her what she meant. She said, when I drive it, it's almost like I can feel the road in the steering wheel. And I was like, Mom, that's called road feel, and it's a good thing. She goes, I know. She says, I feel like I actually control this car. And this was a woman who had driven over-assisted power steering station wagons for most of her driving life. And suddenly she was driving something with a really, I mean, the steering on the G20 was outstanding. It was peppy. And there's my mom, who would have been in her 50s at that point, really suddenly liking to drive. That's the kind of flame they need to get back if they're gonna make this division work. They're good cars. There's no argument that Infiniti is a bad car. They're not exceptional, and they don't stand out anymore. That's my big take on it, and it's a shame. I'd like to see them come bounding back with something that makes me go, wow, that's cool. You know, that's what they need. They need a wow, that's cool car.
Yeah. No. Well, if
Not
anyone
the
from
Cybertruck.
the Cybertruck.
I was about to say
not the
Cybertruck by Infiniti, and I think that solves all the problems.
There you go. 2 problems solved with 1 really questionable vehicle, right? Okay.
Well, if somebody from
It can happen.
that wants to hire the 3 of us as consultants, we're reasonably priced. All right. All right. That brings to a close another week's episode of Car-pinionated. Glenn and Jeff, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys. And we will be back next week. See everyone.